And for more analysis on the release of the emergency oil reserves, we now welcome Rod D. Martin. He's founder and CEO of Martin Capital. Thanks for joining us this morning, Rod. How significant is the IEA's release of the 400 million barrels, plus the additional ones released by Trump in the context of this current oil supply disruption?
Well, it's a big deal, but it's not the solution. And the reason it's a big deal, first of all, it's the biggest coordinated release from strategic petroleum reserves in history. There's nothing quite like it, even staggered over time. So this is a big deal, and the world uses 100 million barrels a day. So, you're going to hear some pundits go on about how this is only 4 days supply. That really misses the point. We're only losing about 10 million barrels a day from the Gulf. So this actually stretches out over a decent amount of time. And what else is happening in the interim is that, first of all, the Saudis have a pipeline that they have used, it's been tested, that gets their oil redirected from the port at Ras Tanura down to the Red Sea. And those sea lanes are safe. That can potentially accommodate almost 70% of Saudi production, getting that back online probably by the end of the month. And then the U.S. military operation continues. We continue to degrade Iranian ability to close the straits at a phenomenal rate. And I would contend that they haven't really closed it even now. Their mining is very limited. They have hit a few tankers, but they haven't actually sunk anything. And that's before the U.S. Navy starts escorting tankers through the Strait. So I think this is a short-term problem, and our projection for Q2 oil prices in the $70 to $80 range is still valid.
And you do point to the Red Sea being an alternative to reroute some of the oil, but it's certainly the minority that could be rerouted through that route for what currently flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So how meaningfully can this current emergency reserves release be to stabilize the oil prices, in your view?
Well, it buys us about a month. That's really the bottom line. And in that month, you can get that pipeline up and running in Saudi Arabia. Again, that's 70% of Saudi production. That's not for, the UAE and Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait or Iraq, but it is meaningful by far. It makes a huge difference. Specifically, I would say close to half of the shortfall. So that's a big deal. But the biggest problem remains Iran itself. And this is the point that a lot of people are missing. They're focused on the short-term consequences of the war. They're missing that oil prices have been elevated for decades because of the risk premium that is added to the price as a result of the knowledge that Iran constantly threatens to do exactly this. They have been holding the world hostage by their assertion of potential control and blockade of the Strait for decades, basically my whole lifetime. And the U.S. Navy is in the process of eliminating that threat. So we could see much lower oil prices a year from now, both because that threat is eradicated and also because Iranian oil will be back on the legitimate market in force. That's going to do a lot for the global economy.
Yeah, you make a really interesting point about short-term thinking. You see that with the tariffs as well, where people are worried about, the short-term prices, where, when you think about hollowing out of the manufacturing here in America. So similarly, when we parallel that over to oil prices, if the Trump saying that he expects prices to actually go below where they were once this is addressed head on, as you're pointing to. So what could that look like for energy prices should the U.S. be successful in fully, eliminating the Iranian threat and potentially having full regime change?
Well, it's a really big deal. I mean, the biggest thing being that Iranian production has been offline for legitimate purposes for a very long time now. They've been selling 90% of their oil exports to China at a steeply discounted rate, All of that is illegal. All of that is going through the shadow fleet that we're also disrupting at this same time. And all of that comes back into the open market at market price. Is that going to happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. But a year from now, that's a very real thing. The other thing, of course, is Venezuela. Trump bringing Venezuela back online and sending back competent engineers instead of the kleptocrats who had been running Venezuelan oil production since the country nationalized all of those private company assets. Having competent people in there and having legal oil flowing is also going to make a huge difference in world markets. So I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now we're looking at $50 a barrel oil, and that's still within the range that lets American frackers produce profitably. It's a little tight, but I mean, for the global economy, for the consumer market, that's a huge, huge boon. And I would just point out that this would be 1,000 times worse. Iran's not going to be able to make the price of oil $200 a barrel like they're pretending, but they absolutely would be able to push it to 200 or 300 or even 400 if the U.S. hadn't stepped up and more than tripled its own production due to fracking over the last decade. That is the unsung story, and those guys are the heroes of this whole thing.
Yeah, Rod, and I think that average Joes like me, when we hear about a barrel of oil, I can't remember ever buying a barrel of oil, but I know I'm paying my heating bills, which fortunately are starting to go down as we get into the spring. And I know that, gas dropped below $3 a gallon, and now it's up to $3.50. So put it in those contexts. If what happens plays out the way you think, Trump has even said gas could go below $2 a gallon. Does that cross that threshold where fracking becomes sort of unsustainable? Where do you expect the pump? And as a percentage, what do you expect for maybe next winter's heating bills? Would they be 20% down, flat? Put it in sort of, everyday person's terms where, the pump and our heating bills that we can understand.
I expect all that to come down over the next year. Not so much that it hurts the Permian Basin, but enough, or at least hurts it much, but enough that it really helps consumers. And you have correctly stated, there's the gasoline price, there's the heating oil price. But of course, as you know, energy affects literally everything. Energy has to be purchased by every single part of the chain of production. So all along the way, if the price of oil is up, the price of every single thing is being increased. It ripples through the whole economy. So bringing that down is a huge positive. And again, Venezuela makes a difference in that. Iran makes a difference in that. The other one, once we get to a peace deal in Ukraine, is we're going to see Russian production come back, and we're going to see a lot of positive things there. So we could actually reach a point. I'm not predicting this, but I think it's very possible. You could get out a year and a half and actually see an oil glut.
Rod D. Martin, we're holding you to that oil glut. Appreciate your analysis as always.
Thank you.